How you doing?
Hey, it's a great day to be alive, everybody. We're over here where I can get some sun and get a little vitamin D today.
It's always good for us.
Probably the picture may not be as great, but I've got a lot of solar panel room.
We can
there.
certainly see the contours of your brain this way.
We can? Okay.
Well, we'll pretend that we can, because we're going to talk about brains today.
All right. Well, that's one of the second most favorite organs.
Yeah,
as
exactly.
They say.
Well, yeah. So, and also decision making, brains and decision making. Yeah.
And that's an interesting connection. We're supposedly always talking to our brains, letting our brains, our non-emotional, logical side make decisions. That's what everybody says, right?
Yeah, but we now know through a lot of the advances in neuroscience that it's not possible to separate out our emotions.
That's. Oh, by the way, this is Wendy Dickinson.
Send us hi. And Jay Cowan with Business Owners Exit Strategies. And we're here today enjoying a cup of coffee this afternoon at Coal Mine Coffee at 117 Brownsway Road. And are so looking forward to this topic of decision making.
Yes, it has a lot to do with many decisions, and of course, in my favorite subject of when is the best time to be, how should you be prepared to get out of your business? And one of the biggest problems is people having to make that decision, and as we've talked about before. And so I'm really interested in learning more about the brain and how it helps us make decisions or maybe interfere with decisions sometimes.
Yeah, well, here's something that I didn't realize that, well, first of all, let me say, I really believe that there have been enough advances that we really need to understand, at least on some level, how our brains work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for the purposes of our discussion today, we'll just consider this mental model of the brain as three layers. So we've got our brain stem, which is the oldest part of our brain. It's kind of that reptilian type part of our brain.
The part that reminds us to breathe and our heartbeats and so forth. Yeah.
Kind of the survival instincts.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that layer that has the limbic system. It's got our amygdala. It's kind of our mammalian brain. So I'm going to call it a dog brain because I'm a dog lover.
I'll accept that.
Yeah. And then we have, of course, the piece of it that makes us human is that prefrontal cortex, which is the most developed.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that's where our emotions lie too as well. See, I did read.
And it's interesting because we also have some emotions, like some of the more foundational emotions in that mammalian brain, that dog brain. So things like contentment or fear,
mm-hmm.
and also our brain stem. And I think that really gets at the heart at need to understand that those three levels of our brain are all necessary and integral to the functioning of our emotions, but also in making our decisions.
Well, what this topic sort of triggers for me is going back many, many years in my sales development about a manager telling me one day, he said, Jay, you want to be able to help people make decisions, and you want to be able to give them the pros and the cons, the features and the benefits, and allow them to make that decision. But the problem is people rarely make decisions based on logic. They almost always make decisions based on gut, if you will, or their emotions or whatever's back there. So your key really is to understand what they get excited about, what their fears are, what emotions make them make those decisions. And so whenever I hear somebody go, well, we got to make this logical, I think they're not really, I know what they're trying to say, but I think they're not really missing the point there. It is the emotional side that causes us to do things.
I agree. And did I tell you about that bar association event I went to and asked everybody what the hardest part of their job was during a merger or an acquisition? And they said the emotion.
Oh, yes, yes.
So, and I asked them then, what was your recommendation? And they're like, oh, take the emotion out of it.
Right.
And
so, that's perfect.
Your point is exactly right. I mean, emotions are messy, so it'd be nice if we could take that out of it sometimes, or we think it would be. Really wouldn't.
Well, we get into the left brain, right brain, and what
Yeah.
is it? The right brain's the emotional side, supposedly, and the left brain is the non-emotional.
And again, that's just not accurate,
Yeah.
but that's what we all believe.
Yeah, right. That's what they keep telling me.
Yeah. So it's like if we picture our neural pathways of like being a Los Angeles freeway where everybody's like driving like bats out of hell. And then we've got 3 passengers that are emotions and thoughts and what we think are facts, all riding in the vehicle, but they all want to drive. And so they're constantly switching drivers as to whoever can wrest the wheel from the other, but without stopping the car.
Great
I
analogy.
know,
Wow,
right?
I love that visual.
So it's just happening all the time. And I think advisors could do a lot to prepare an owner for those moments, right? Because I think that's one of the factors that contributes to poor decision making.
Absolutely. I mean, it clearly is, and I think that's and the reason why people don't maybe make those decisions for the same reason. And I think when we talk about mixed emotions, that's where that's kind of where that comes from. And so they're having a hard time because many decisions can be emotional, i.e. there's some fear of the unknown. I'm excited about, pursuing this next project. And they do get into conflict, and it's hard to work through that. So therefore it's a lot easier to just say, I don't want to think about this anymore. Let's put it off till tomorrow. Kick the can down the road, so to speak.
Yeah, and so I'm going to kick the can down the road right now, actually, and just recommend to all of you, if you want to do some more reading on this, we suggest a couple of articles in the show notes. One of them is through CNBC and another one through Harvard Business Review. We think both are good reads.
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, I mean, going back to what you said about left hemisphere, right hemisphere, so we've got the 2 hemispheres, we have the 3 layers of control, and so really what we want to recognize that all parts of our brain are communicating and interacting with each other all the time.
Yes, and obviously without our thinking about it, it is natural. And I would have to admit that oftentimes when somebody would start wanting to get into this science in detail with me, I would tend to look at it as, that's just noise for me. But
exactly, so boring.
as you pointed out just moments ago, there's so much more we know about the brain these days and how it really does affect things. Obviously, things we don't think about, but things that we tend to get with our emotions. I don't think we can afford to ignore that anymore.
No, we really can't. And one of the things in that article, I'm sure you'll recall, is there's a study, well, actually several studies that were done on people who unfortunately have sustained brain injuries. And the injuries affected the person's ability to manifest emotion.
That was fascinating.
I know, right?
Oh,
and so without their emotions, without access to their emotions, these folks were unable to make a decision even between something as simple a decision as choosing one piece of paper over another.
Yes, that was the real wake up for me, that that having emotions not involved would make us so disorganized, not be able to do the most simple organizational things because we don't have our emotions to use, as opposed to we don't need emotions, we can do anything as long as we use logic and be unemotional. So that was really interesting.
It made me wonder, those advisors who, with the best of intentions, recommend taking the emotion out of it, I wonder how often they're getting in the way of the person making the decision because the person's trying to deny their emotions.
Well, I know one thing, never to say to my wife, hey, don't be so emotional about this. The emotion ratchets us up, but it's another way of saying, that what you're feeling right now doesn't count.
Yeah.
And, and if you're an advisor, you don't want to say that either to your potential client.
Yeah, because that's sending them a mixed message, right? It's like, on the one hand, yes, I quote unquote value this relationship, but on the other hand, I only value the part of you that isn't emotional.
Yeah, it's somewhat dismissive.
Yeah, it is.
So absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about how we can set ourselves up to succeed in making decisions.
I'm always interested in that.
Yeah. So one thing we want to make sure is we do take note of our emotions, right? So almost having
getting centered, like we talked about prior.
Exactly.
So these things do build. You might notice that.
Do.
But yeah, getting centered enough. So where am I right now? How am I feeling about this? And why am I feeling this way about this? And so that's not ignoring emotion. That's just sort of checking in and seeing where that is. And that's sort of, I think, your brain's way of saying, hey, pay attention. Don't let this run away from you. But you do need, we do need our emotions, like you said, in our
Yeah.
decision making.
You know what? I have a client that has created a spreadsheet where this person, when they have a decision to make, they now have a process.
Mm-hmm.
And so they record the process on the spreadsheet. And then what they found is, I guess we've been working together now since August of last year. So what they've discovered now is that they can go back and look over those past decisions. And so their decision-making process is streamlined. Now they have a greater sense of, oh yes, I am there. I can check this box. This emotion is present. That one is present. And looking at my history, when these two things are present, these are the things that help most, and these are the results of those decisions, or how I feel about it at this point. So I think it's helpful.
I'd love to get that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's right. Well, it's like, again, when we talked about our mission and vision and being in touch with what they are, and as a way to help us make decisions on what direction we're going. If this is taking us away from our mission,
Right.
I consider that the same thing. If we're able to have a reference point that helps us streamline that, we're just going to be that much more effective and take some of the, I'm not going to say emotion, take some of the indecisiveness out of
So
the picture.
I wonder if we could say uncertainty.
Uncertainty is a good word.
You know, because that actually is still an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yes.
it kind of,
Not in what we used to think of as emotion.
right.
Yeah.
And it's not negative or positive.
Right.
It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah, so we're talking more about, we're not talking just about laughing and crying here.
No,
you know.
no, not usually in these decisions.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
but there's a great deal of we worry, are we making the right decision? And what if I make the wrong decision? And I don't want to make the wrong decision, so therefore it's better to make no decision. And I think that happens a great deal. And, making decisions is like, if you're crossing the train tracks and suddenly your car stalls right there on the middle of the train track, and there's a train coming, you've got a decision to make. Mm-hmm. Do I stay in the car because I really love this car, and keep trying to get it started and get off the track? Or do I get out of the car and get away, abandon the car and get away from it so I'll be safe? Or do I just sit here and do nothing? Well, the second and third choices are really the same.
Yes, they
when you're
are.
not doing something, you're still making a decision.
Yes, you are.
So
yes,
I think that happens a lot with things more so than we know about decision making, and not making decisions is a choice.
Okay, and I'm sure you could all see that I'm anticipating Jay finishing, so I could say what the next thing I want to say. But
wait.
Jay, this thing about exit planning, it drives me crazy. I went to an event yesterday, and I think they said it was something like almost 100 women there who have their own businesses, and probably a half dozen men. It's primarily a women's networking organization. And so the CEO of the organization stood up and said that she announced her successor. And she said, in 10 years, I am no longer going to be in this role. My daughter is my successor. And then she laid out for everybody in the room what the plan is for how her daughter is going to assume the responsibilities in this organization.
Good for her.
I know, right? And so I had the opportunity to sit with her at lunch, and she went and said basically to the entire room, I had just learned that only 10% of small businesses have a succession plan. 94% of financial planners and advisors talk to their clients about succession planning, that only 10% of the owners and founders have a plan.
I'm really even surprised with the statistic about that many advisors have spoken, at least talked about it. That's much higher than I would have guessed.
And they're getting nowhere. And going back to your example about the train tracks, so again, when an owner is not making a decision, when an owner is not taking steps to put any kind of a plan in place, much less formulate one, well, it's sitting yourself on the train track.
You know, one of the articles that you referenced also talked about, in terms of the exit planning process, that 60 to 70% of business owners out there anticipate when they sell their business, that's going to be their main retirement source of funds.
I know it.
And yet, to your previous point, 10%, I've heard 10 to 30%, depending on what article you read, but a substantial small number of people actually have a written plan.
Well, PricewaterhouseCooper, their new study said 18, which is kind of in between what you just said.
And so if that being the case, and people recognize this is what they want, this is what their anticipation is, but they have made no move to do something to make sure that's going to happen.
Right.
And then we have so few people that owners are having a horrible time finding that person or persons who are going to buy their business from them, whether it's internal or external. So what are you waiting for?
Yeah, well, and okay, so the other thing is, and of course, as the transitions coach here, I'm going to say emotion, people are either trying to shut down their emotion about it, or they're just choosing to ignore the whole process and the emotions that could come up as a result. And I feel like that is one of the contributing factors, which also a lot of people are talking about now, as to why business owners never get around to it. Quote unquote.
Well, they've made that decision not to make a decision, which means they're going to sit on the train tracks until the train runs over them.
Yeah, So, all right. So if you're procrastinating, if you feel like you have to get it perfect, if you are feeling overwhelmed with everything else you have to do, if you also have a wish for things to stay just the way they are, all of those things are understandable and normal. But as a business owner, your life and your decisions impact a lot of other people. So if you can break it down into small steps, like the client I mentioned, who has the spreadsheet, if you can take a spreadsheet and maybe just put across the top meetings with an exit planner, meeting with a financial planner, meeting with, perhaps an M&A attorney or business broker here or there, just to get an idea of what your business is worth. Meet with someone like me, an M&A coach. Meet with the people, and you could do, if you're going to retire, you want to retire 5 years from now, if you met with one of those people, if you did one little step every month, you would have taken about 60 steps in 5 years.
That's a very good point. When the process, and most of the time, the idea of thinking about your transition, your future transition, exit planning, it becomes overwhelming when you look at it in its entirety. But when you sit down and break it down, it becomes much more manageable. And really, it doesn't have to be overwhelming. If you, again, back to the team idea, if you're using a team of people who can help break this down for you and get you through, you can spend more of your time with making the hard decisions that seem to be hard anyway, having the information you need to make a decision, as well as continue to manage that business. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. And I think that's one of the top 2 or 3 reasons that people I've talked to and statistics have shown the idea of starting this process is it's overwhelming. They just don't see how they can ever have the time, and they can't face that. And so that's one of the emotions that we have to overcome.
Yes, it is. The other interesting thing, for me, when we consider how our brains operate, our brains are constantly evaluating risks and rewards. And to some people, going through this process feels like a risk, right? They've got to, number one, contend with their own mortality, potentially. They may also have a relationship that is less than satisfying, and so that gets in the way. I mean, there could be a lot of things that get in the way. But by going ahead and putting together this team of people, and then having those people take a look at your decision-making process, well, then you're not doing it by yourself. You're doing it amongst your team.
And you can train yourself with help from other people on being prepared for that, and much in the way that you take the average U.S. military soldier who is trained to do the things that they do. Somebody could appear to be extremely smart and motivated, even if they're not, but when they've been trained, the training kicks in and they can do things that they would normally not have been able to do. And I feel that's the same way with this kind of process. But you'd be working with advisors and people who are already trained who can help you with what you need to know and how to start folding this into your, if not daily, weekly, monthly preparation now, as opposed to when you've only got 18 months to, suddenly I got to get out of this thing because of something that's going on. And so that's the benefit of starting sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and you know what else I was thinking? That if the person goes ahead and starts, and let's say they're 5 years out, I'm just going to use that because we mentioned that earlier. Let's say something happens in 2.5 years that they've got to get out.
Yes.
Well, they've at least done that much.
Right. But that's another good point about starting sooner, because your anticipated time frame could change at a moment's notice.
Right, and it could be something negative, like a health issue, but it could be something wonderful, like someone calls you up and says, "Look, I'd really like to buy your business."
Yes.
Well, then you'd be prepared.
I had somebody that I knew of that got one of those unanticipated actions when somebody came and offered to buy their business, but they put it off because they didn't know if this was a good deal or not. They hadn't done any of the research. They hadn't thought about the value of their business. And they said, gee, I don't want to be taken advantage of. And by the time they finished doing all that and came back to the table, it was too late. That person had already moved on.
Yeah.
So even if you know it's going to be years, or you think it's going to be years, the sooner you start on this, when it's easier and get in your mind what that might be, the better off you're going to be.
Hey, can I do a book recommendation?
I've never stopped you before.
Okay, I have just not only read the book, but also am doing the field guide of the 12-week year. Have you heard of that?
Yes, you have mentioned that to me before.
I love that. I'm just wondering if that could be also a great process for something like this.
Well,
or framework.
You're motivating me to do it, because you've talked about it a couple, 3 times, and I think it's, on the surface, it sounds pretty good to me. So I need to do that. I need to review that book.
I gotta tell you, I've run into 3 people who've been using it. One who's in an international business, well, 2 who are in international businesses, and one of those people I know have actually tripled their revenue.
Wow.
So
it's good enough for me.
Yeah, I mean, the other person I don't know about revenue, but now that person likes it so much they're having their entire team use it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's commitment. That's action.
Yeah. And then another person, the person who actually told me about the book, although one of the other folks said that they told me about it too and I forgot. But anyway, he actually is using it himself, and so he's in that first year, but his plan is to have his team use it. But he wanted to try it himself for a year.
Yes. Well, look, there are over 10 million baby boomer business owners.
Oh, I know, you guys.
Right now. And there are not 10 million potential buyers of businesses out there.
No.
So you can't, hope is not a strategy. Putting your head in the sand is not a strategy. We as owners need to start focusing on really getting a handle on what our plan is going to be. And I will tell you this, that regardless of whether or not you ever get around to exiting from your business on a favorable basis, your business is going to actually be worth so much more. You're going to enjoy your business more. You're going to increase your revenue from the process. Yeah, that I can guarantee.
I agree with you. And the other thing, when we were talking about overwhelm and that sort of thing, I feel like that going ahead and making these steps, taking some of these steps, really increases your bandwidth, takes the pressure off.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. I've seen it happen too many times. So
yeah. So, okay, is that our final word on today, do you think?
Well, for the moment, yes, I think so. I think we've probably exhausted that. But maybe not. You might have one more.
We could talk about this for days.
I'm being facetious, but
yeah, I know.
Stop somewhere.
All right, so let us close here. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any comments or questions, suggestions for us on topics you'd like to hear about. Next week, we're going to be talking about integrity and transparency. It's hard for people to trust, and there are good reasons for that.
Oh, yeah. And we'd certainly love to hear from you. good, bad, or indifferent. I know for myself, I enjoy these with spending time with Wendy and going through these things. It'd be really great to hear from you and give us your feedback, no matter how emotional the result might be.
Yeah.
Let us know how we're doing. We'd like to hear from you.
Yeah. So have a good day. We'll see you next week on Tuesday at 2 o'clock from Coal Mine Coffee. And we'll talk about integrity and transparency. Have a good day.
Bye.